Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into, well, into the deep.
Oh, yeah.
The 2024-2025 First Tech Challenge Game Manual, that is. We're going beyond the basics. Think of it less like nuts and bolts and more about unearthing the philosophy and values that make FTC what it is.
Yeah, you know the manual, it's comprehensive, it's all there, but it's those unwritten rules, the spirit of the competition. That's where things get really interesting.
I'm all ears. What really jumped at me in the start was how the manual doesn't just dive straight into the technical stuff. It leads with values.
For sure. First, they really prioritize things like gracious professionalism and this thing called cooperation. It's more than just a buzzword.
Cooperation. Okay, now you have to explain that one.
All right, so think about it like this. Imagine a software engineer. They're working on a new app, right? They might actually be collaborating with developers from other companies on, let's say, open source code, even though their companies are technically competitors in the market. So it's that same energy, fierce competition, yeah, but always with that willingness to lend a hand.
So it's like they're getting a head start on their future careers. Because that's the real world, right? Collaborating to solve problems, especially in STEM fields. Okay, I see why we're doing this deep dive, but we've got to talk about the game itself, robots.
Definitely. This year, it's Into the Deep, an underwater world, two alliances working together to gather samples, score them in baskets in these special chambers. But there's a twist. Human players are right there on the field, working with the robots to create specimens.
Wait, specimens? So it's more than just programming a robot to do its thing on its own.
100%. This year, you need that coordination, that back and forth between the robot and the human player. They have to be in sync, which makes the strategy so much more interesting.
Okay, now this is what I'm talking about. And what about the end game, the ascent? Sounds intense.
It's where strategy is key. It's not just about racking up points during the match, but positioning yourself for those final moments. The goal is to get to the highest ascent level, which involves some specific maneuvers. For example, your robot needs to be touching a rung, a scoring element on the field, but also completely supported by it. No shortcuts.
I'm getting the feeling this manual is like a treasure map with layers to uncover. Speaking of interpretations, what about the rules?
FTC does not mess around with its rules, and for good reason.
One that stood out to me, Rule G205, essentially. No throwing matches, which seems kind of obvious.
You'd think so, but there's a deeper philosophy there. Remember, gracious professionalism, cooperation, intentionally losing, trying to game the rankings, that goes against the whole spirit of things. It's about fair play, genuine effort, always striving to be better.
So it's not just about winning, but about what you learn along the way.
Exactly. Learning from your victories, but also your setbacks. Aiming for that personal best every time.
And what about when things go sideways, mistakes happen with the robot or the team,
That's where the yellow and red cards come in. But it's more than just penalties, although those are part of it. It's addressing things like unsportsmanlike conduct, safety violations, really anything that goes against those core values we were talking about.
A little course correction, a reminder of the bigger picture.
Right. And this is so important as you really dive into FTC, understanding the why behind the rules, just as much as the what.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of why, can we talk about the robot construction rules? I was a bit overwhelmed at first. All the limitations, motors, servos, battery power, feels like they're tying your hands.
It can definitely feel that way, but it's all intentional. Remember, fairness, learning, limiting those components levels the playing field. It's not just about building the most powerful machine.
So it's about ingenuity, using what you've got.
Exactly. Getting creative with limited resources, elegant solutions within constraints, problem solving over just outspending the competition.
I'm always rooting for the underdog. But hold on, the robot parts. Teams can reuse custom designs, parts from previous years. Doesn't seem very limiting.
And that's the cool part. It encourages that long-term view, building on what you've learned. Imagine, a team takes a design that didn't quite work last year, refines it, comes back even stronger. It's just like real-world engineering, iteration, continuous improvement.
They're building their own legacy, one robot part at a time.
Exactly. It adds a whole other layer to the competition.
This is fascinating. So we've got the values, the game, the rules, ready to build a robot.
Almost. There's a lot more to explore in the world of FTC.
So before the break, we were talking about reusing robot parts and that long-term perspective. It seems like that's a big part of FTC learning and building year after year. But shifting gears here, literally, let's talk about what makes these robots move the motors.
Yeah, the motors, the
Yeah.
heart of the robot, right?
Right.
Providing the power for all those cool moves and actions.
And I'm guessing there's some pretty strict rules about what kind of motors teams can use.
You know it. FTC is all about that level playing field. So yeah, they have very specific types and quantities of motors that are allowed. This year, teams get to pick from a selection of approved motors, but there are limits on things like the power and the gear ratios.
So no strapping a giant engine onto a tiny chassis.
Exactly. It's all about strategic design. You got to maximize efficiency within those limitations. It's amazing to see how the teams come up with creative solutions to those game challenges with those limitations in mind.
It's all about working smarter, not harder, right? But motors are just one piece of the puzzle. What about these other components I see in the manual, like servos? What do those do?
Servos. Think of them like smaller, more precise motors. They're perfect for things that need specific angular movements, like if you want to open and close a gripper or rotate a sensor, those kinds of things.
So if the motors are the muscles, then the servos are like the fine motor skills.
Now you're getting it.
Yeah.
And just like motors, FTC has rules about what kind of servos and how many you can use. Again, it's all about fairness and preventing teams from getting an advantage just by having more power.
Makes you wonder, with all these limitations, how do they keep things interesting year after year? Does it get kind of repetitive?
That's the beauty of it. That's where the game design comes in. Even with limitations on robot parts, the challenge is all in how you use them. Every year, the game field changes, the tasks change, the whole strategic landscape shifts.
So even if a team reuses a chassis or a mechanism, they're constantly adapting and coming up with new ideas to meet the demands of the new game.
Exactly. Think of it like a toolbox full of tools. You might use a hammer one year to build a birdhouse, and the next year you use that same hammer to build a bookshelf. The tools are the same, but the end result is totally different.
I love that. That combination of familiarity and new challenges is what keeps things fresh. I can definitely see why this competition is so appealing to so many young minds.
Absolutely. But we can't forget another essential piece that brings these robots to life: the battery.
The battery. Now that's an area where I'm sure safety is a top priority.
You're telling me FTC is super serious about battery safety. The manual has all these specific rules about the type of battery allowed, how it should be charged, how it should even be mounted on the robot.
So no bringing your dad's car battery to power up the robot for an extra edge.
Nope, not a chance. The battery has to be an official First Tech Challenge battery, and you have to treat it with care. Teams also have to use these specific power-regulating devices to prevent any electrical accidents during the competition.
Right. Don't want a rogue spark turning the robot into a fireworks show.
Exactly. Safety first. But speaking of power, let's shift our focus to those brains we mentioned earlier, the control system.
Right, because all those motors and servos are useless without something telling them what to do. It's like having a car with no driver.
Exactly. And FTC has specific rules about the control system, mainly to make sure the teams are learning those fundamental robotics and programming skills instead of just relying on something pre-built.
So no remote controlling the robot with a joystick.
Well, not quite. During the match, the robot has to operate on its own, either based on what's been programmed beforehand or reacting to input from its sensors. It's about designing a smart robot, not just driving a remote-controlled car.
That's where the real challenge comes in then. Programming for those real-time situations and making sure the robot can react accordingly.
Absolutely. And even the control system itself has to meet certain specs. Teams can choose between two main options: a RV control hub or an Android smartphone connected to a RV expansion hub.
Hold on, a smartphone, like the one I'm using right now to record this.
Well, sort of. It has to be a specific model approved for the competition. They list them in the manual. They're usually older models chosen because they're reliable and have the processing power needed without being overly sophisticated.
That's wild. Robots running on smartphones. It's like something straight out of science fiction.
And just like in those movies, communication is key. The control system lets the robot receive instructions and send back data, but it all has to happen according to the rules.
How so? What kind of rules are we talking about here?
Well, for instance, FTC has rules about wireless communication. That's to make sure everything is fair during the match. Teams can't use any external devices or signals to control the robot once the match starts. No backdoor remote controls or outside interference allowed.
So it all comes down to that pre-programmed code and the robot's ability to execute it.
Exactly. It's a testament to the team's programming skills and their ability to plan for and adapt to different situations in the game.
This is all so fascinating. We've covered motors, servos, batteries, even the brains of the operation. What else is there to explore in the world of FTC?
Well, we can't forget about the most important element of all, the human element.
The human element. What do you mean?
Exactly. Because even with all this amazing technology, at the end of the day, it's the students, the mentors, the volunteers who make this competition what it is. Remember, FTC is about way more than just robots. It's about building a better future.
We're back, still diving deep into First Tech Challenge.
Yeah.
Before the break, it was all about the tech, the electronics, making those robots tick. But you said it yourself, there's that human element too.
Big time. And this year, it goes beyond just cheering from the sidelines.
Yeah.
The human element is right there in the game, a part of it, interacting with those robots in a way we haven't seen before.
You're talking about those specimens, right?
Yeah.
I'm still not 100% clear on what they are, how they fit into everything.
Right. So a specimen is basically a scoring element, but it's put together, assembled right there on the field by the human players. They take samples. Each alliance has its own. Combine those with a clip, kind of like a mini engineering puzzle.
So you're not just programming the robot to collect score all on autopilot. You need that human player working with the robot in real time.
That's it. Adds a whole new level to the strategy. And the human player has got to work fast, efficiently. The clock's ticking during that match.
I bet. Those robots zipping around must be intense. Speaking of which, how do they make sure that's safe, humans and robots interacting like that?
Safety is number one, always. The manual has specific rules, guidelines, the whole 9 yards. Human players have their designated spot. It's called the observation zone, their own workspace, essentially. Robots can't go there while the humans building those specimens.
Like a dance, everyone's got their steps, respecting each other's space.
Perfect analogy. And that's FTC in a nutshell, right? Not just robots, but building up those 21st century skills, collaboration, problem solving, thinking on your feet.
It's like they're prepping these students for a future where humans, technology, got to work hand in hand.
Exactly. And FTC makes it fun, engaging, challenging, a perfect environment to build those skills. Plus, that sense of community, it's amazing. Teams helping each other out, sharing what they know, celebrating successes, inspiring stuff.
Sounds like FTC is in a league of its own, where technical skills, yeah, but also creativity, collaboration, passion for innovation all come together.
You said it.
Well, we've resurfaced from our deep dive into First Tech Challenge, and I got to say, a whole new appreciation for what's going on with this competition.
Just a glimpse into this amazing world.
That's right. The rules, the robots, even that human element we talked about. It's what makes FTC so special.
But it's just the tip of the iceberg. The real journey starts when you really dig into that game manual, explore it, find your own aha moments.
So, to everyone listening, don't just be a spectator. Dive in, explore, maybe even join the FTC community. You never know what you might find.
Could be your next passion.
Until next time,
Yeah.
keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those robots running.